All right. Well, hi, everyone. Really excited that y'all have decided to join us today for meeting number 11 of Community Observations. We are super excited to have you all. So first, just a quick couple of introductions if you don't know us. I'm Tiffany Oda. I'm the Director of Community Operations at Venefi. And a couple loves of mine went to Antarctica in January, and it was an amazing experience, and I'm a huge fan. Also kind of basic stuff, but I love Aperol spritzes. That's my cocktail or drink of the month, or my trending drink right now. And I'm a huge Orange Theory fan as well. And then current ops project that I've been working on is, and I talked about this in dinner 5 a little bit, is dashboarding. So our community is ramping up. We launched in September, and right now I'm trying to put together comprehensive dashboards for all of our stakeholders across the business units in the organization to portray metrics that are relevant for them and showing the impact and the value that the community has for each of those teams. So that's my current ops project that I'm working on.
Sounds exciting. I am Cassie Mays. I am located in Austin, Texas. I focus on community operations at Atlassian. And I had to add this pic because I think in the last meetup I had brought up that we were planning for Vegas. And so that was the first week of April where we had all of our activities for our community leaders, like community specific. It was so much fun. I don't know if any of y'all have been able to go to conferences because I know life has just been crazy everywhere, but it was so refreshing to like see people again in person and like see your work in real life too, not just like on Zoom. So I really enjoyed that. So I just wanted to share that. I also love traveling and food and family. Those are all super fun. And the current ops project I'm working on is the future of community events. So I'm going to meet up with some of my teammates IRL and form a business case of, if you give us like X amount of dollars and headcount, we're going to do this. And so I'm really excited about that because I think there's a lot more resources that we could be putting towards this amazing program. So I am currently working on that. And then I'll move over into meeting logistics. Just as a friendly reminder, we want everyone to be respectful and kind to everyone, when we're asking questions, whether that be live on the Zoom or in the chat. Also, cameras are optional. Zoom fatigue is real. I won't go into that. And we love a discussion. So if you have any questions, you don't need to wait until the presenter is done. We can ask them in the chat. And I don't know if our presenters like to answer live, but we'll also just make sure we can up-level those at the end of your talk. And then sessions are recorded. We do have a community page where not only the recording lives, but also the slide deck if you need any information that you see today.
All right, so we are in the, tail end now of the Ops Top Dog series. This is a framework that was created by the infamous Holly Firestone on the pillars of what a community operations person does. So we are on number 7 of the Ops Top Dog series with documentation. And we have 2 amazing speakers lined up today. We have Allison and Danny. So thank you so much, Allison and Danny, for attending today, and really excited to hear your sessions. And I'll give you the floor so you can go ahead and start.
All right, I think I'm first up. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I apologize in advance if this is a little clunky. I just moved from Google back to Microsoft, so I need to relearn my sharing skills. So let me go ahead and get this pulled up. Slideshow. All right, does everybody see my lovely dog?
Perfect.
All right,
Yes.
Perfect. Go ahead and move my little, whoops. All right, sorry. All right, hello everyone. My name is Allison Abel, as Tiffany just mentioned. I'm currently the Senior Manager of Community at Automation Anywhere, but very fresh. I think I'm on week number 3 or 4, so this is a brand new opportunity I just dived into. I'm really excited to talk about the topic of documentation because it's very top of mind for me. Prior to Automation Anywhere, I've been in the community industry for several years now, worked for big, small, medium, any type of community you can think of, both as a solo community manager and recently with the emergence of community teams, having the opportunity to build and also be a member of community teams, which is really exciting. It's been thrilling to see this industry thrive and grow, and all these niche roles start to pop up too. So love being a part of these meetings. When I'm not building community, I love road trips. It's been a new COVID thing I've recently fallen in love with. Reading is a new rediscovered passion. Got a little stuck in the Netflix binge also because of COVID, so trying to get out of it and rediscover my passion for learning, storytelling, etc. And I have to shout out, I'm an auntie and absolutely love it. I'm brand new auntie, about a year now. And Evie, my niece, is the joy of my life. So anytime I have an opportunity to connect with her, I take that opportunity. My current ops project really relates to what I'm doing or what we're talking about today. I am Automation Anywhere has an existing community, but we have decided to completely relaunch, reimagine, reinvigorate, reinnovate that space. And so I am really focused right now on building that operational foundation so that we can really launch with success and what our new ecosystem experience will be like. On the right here, I think it's important to always lay a foundation and be transparent where I come from when I approach documentation. I'm a former teacher, so I also love any opportunity I can leverage a former graphic I used to use with my students, but I take very much who, what, when, where, why, how approach to documentation. I want to make sure these questions are always answered in the things that I'm building for anybody that I am servicing, whether that's my team, my intern, my cross-functional partners, or even the leaders that I need to service as well. So diving right in, I really leaned into the metaphors and analogies this presentation. While I've been reading, I've also kept up on my TV watching, and HBO just recently launched a series on Julia Child. Highly recommend it if you are a fan of Julia Child. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was that she didn't just have the recipe for success right away. She really had to build that recipe over time through trial and error. And I think that's really relational to documentation planning. You're going to want to build a recipe, of course, that you're constantly following, but there's also the importance of iteration and space for development long-term too. So what I share here are just some of the common elements I lean into when I approach documentation planning. And I am going to do a lot of talking, but I want to make sure this is interactive. So as I'm going through these elements, I'd love to hear from you. What are your most important elements as well? And leverage the chat to share that too. What are some of the key things that you make sure are on your documentation recipe card when you're building that framework for your ecosystem? So the first one I want to identify, and actually has been really relevant for me, and I just kind of mentioned, is tool set. Whenever I go to build documentation, and I want to emphasize too, when I talk about documentation, I'm talking about it from a holistic ecosystem perspective. It's not just one program. It's just not one piece of operation. It's not just for the team. It's for all those personas I mentioned. An aligned tool set I have found to be something that has been very critical in the documentation process. As I mentioned, my last company was a Google company. My current company really leans into Microsoft. My last company used Monday.com. My current company uses Wrike. Tools are really, really important to keep in mind when you are building your documentation and how you're going to serve that documentation up and how you're going to incorporate those tools into meeting your goals and objectives as well. Another big thing I'll mention with that too is access to tools. Through my many community experiences, organizations are very tool heavy, and it doesn't mean that one department uses the same tool as another department. So I also always try to keep that in mind. I'm a big believer that any documentation that I build should be accessible by anybody within my organization. I'm a big believer in 100% transparency because I really believe that leads to long-term alignment and success as well. So keeping track of those tools, identifying those tools, and then related, building a shared folder taxonomy. So I'll share what that looks like in a minute for me personally. But I find this to be really, really important in building documentation as well. As I mentioned, you're not just serving your team. Your documentation should be serving your cross-functional partners, and it should also be serving the leaders you're reporting to as well. So when I build my shared folder taxonomy, I keep that very much in mind, and I'll share a few of those details in the next slide. On top of that, we have the management framework. I'm a big believer that your management framework shouldn't be different for different things. It should be the same. So I'll share my breakdown of what this looks like as well in a minute, but I use the RACI management framework in everything and anything I do. Now, that being said, I've been in companies that use different management frameworks, and so I do adapt. So if the company I'm working for has another management framework to ensure we're all speaking the same language, I'll adapt that to my documentation management and my documentation. But if we don't have a shared management framework, I try to keep it simple, and I've found RACI to be really simple. And I use it in every conversation that I have and any piece of documentation that I'm building too. And then the next piece, I have to say, is one of my favorite pieces, building a template package. Templates to me are extremely helpful for multiple reasons. I think they help with scale, alignment, and then they really do provide you the opportunity for consistent iteration and innovation too, in my opinion. So some of the templates that I really build out for my documentation, that overall strategic plan, which then impacts my individual strategic plans. So those templates are very similar. So they read the same, organizational goals, community goals, individual program goals, metrics for success. Those types of things are always going to be very clear and stated in a similar fashion as you go down and through the ecosystem. And then one of my favorite tools, and if there's one thing that I leave you with that I would highly encourage everybody to explore, is the playbook concept. So the playbook concept I really leaned into in the last few years of my community building journey. And essentially what that is really answering that who, what, when, where, why, how, in a thing that can be copied and pasted over and over and utilized and iterated too. So an example I'll share, user group meetings. That's a common thing that happens. I have a user group meeting playbook that my user group manager will copy over, and she will build that playbook for that individual meeting following the same criteria. So we're making sure that we're repeating the same process for the programs that we're offering in different regions. It helps her because it provides her a framework to work off of. And then it also opens the door for change. So as she's, reacting step by step to the things we've aligned and agreed on, she may come up with a new idea for a more efficient, better step. She'll note that, and then she'll go to the original playbook template and update that. And then we have iteration and change, if that makes sense. And then project plans too, like I mentioned, if you're using Monday, Wrike, etc., building those templated project plans, you can just easily copy and paste over, use multiple times, huge time saving. There's no need to continuously build new project plans over and over and over. Leverage what you have and iterate from there. And then I got funny, or I tried to get funny down below in that recipe mix. And then just to highlight, all of this is really to be shared internally too. I really leverage my documentation to set the standard for my operational excellence as a community and as a cross-functional partner too. And so there is always an agreed and aligned expectation of what I'm going to bring to the table through the documentation that I create. All right. And I apologize, I can't see the chat, but I'm sure there's some great things and other elements too that you guys keep in mind when you're building your documentation too. The next piece, I'll lean into home edit, just keeping the TV theme alive here. So this is just to give you a glimpse into that shared folder taxonomy that I mentioned. And taxonomies can oftentimes be overwhelming. So what I recommend really is taking this piece by piece, situation by situation. I am entering, for example, with Automation Anywhere, a community that had some structure, but not a lot of structure. So I'm essentially building that structure from scratch. And to make it manageable, I'm building the structure piece by piece by piece. This is a glimpse into that. So focusing on team-specific operations, community ops is a folder section too, because that's going to serve certain audiences, and then program-specific areas as well. And you'll see that user group example there. The thing I'll also highlight here related to maintenance, I always bucket my folders by year. So 2022, this is all the stuff for 2022. When I go to 2023, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to evaluate what I have documentation wise, if there isn't a continuous iteration process, and move it over after that evaluation. So maybe a copy paste, some things may not change, other things may change, but at least I've built an archive. And I think that's especially helpful when you have new team members onboarding, being able to come and look at what was done in the past in a way that is being replicated moving forward too, that structure. And then you'll see here with the program, I used the user group example. It's very top of mind for me. We're very focused on our user groups and relaunching our program there. And so these are just the different elements and documentation elements that I'm building out as well. And then of course, I'm going to admit here, I'm a huge fan of color coding. So we actually leverage an internal documentation system called Quip, and you can color code your folders. So when somebody lands into my community shared folder, ops is one color, program is one color, team operations is one color, and what other folders we have are one color. So it's really quickly, you're able to quickly identify where you need to go as well. All right. And then this last piece I'll share is the management framework. I won't go too deeply into this. This will be shared as well after. I want to make sure I give Danny enough time to dive into his piece. I think he provides a great perspective as well to documentation. I'm more macro here, and I think he'll have a nice micro level consideration. So RACI is something that I very much lean into. I think it is really easy to explain to your internal partners. And this chart that you see at the left is an example of what I share in any piece of documentation I share with cross-functionally within my team. This is a common element that you'll see in that. So user group example, user group meeting management, you'll see all the different elements required for the user group meeting and all the people responsible for each of the categories. I have a documentation playbook. This is from that documentation playbook. Toolset, shared folder taxonomy, templates, doc creation, maintenance, who's responsible, and all the different roles involved in that too, as well. So I will pause here. Are there any questions that I can answer or anything I can clarify?
I actually had a question for you, Allison.
Okay.
So creating RACI charts and having kind of that framework, I love the organization part of it, where you're creating the framework and filling this out and all that stuff, and then sharing it with the team. Execution, on the other hand, is a whole nother story where, you know, do you have any recommendations on the actual like practice of this throughout your team? So like getting their buy-in, getting them to follow these processes, and, you know, making sure that they're aligning with the RACI chart throughout their work.
Yeah, so one of the big pieces that I've learned is enablement of this as well, and working together to speak the common language so it becomes a part of everybody's day-to-day, and that does take some time. So in my current situation, because I do have a brand new team that's brand new to this RACI concept as well, what I've been doing is we've been co-collaborating and co-creating our playbooks and strategic plans. And I've been giving them the opportunity to take this, adapt this, and share with me how they would adapt it in their day-to-day work. And then we've been working together to identify potential alignment gaps in that, and problem solving from there. So a good example would probably be doc creation itself. So I say here, who's responsible, defined per project. So my user group manager is responsible for our user group documentation now. And so I've been working with her to really understand what that responsibility is, what that responsibility looks like, and having her react to that, give it a try, and then us spending some time reflecting on what's working, what's not working, and using really that RACI language too in that reflection too. I think another key piece of that is in enabling my team members to do that cross-functionally. This is a brand new concept cross-functionally too. So I've also been very intentional in any meeting I run. This is one of the first things you'll see in the project. And it's one of the last things we'll land on for alignment on next steps. And then I've had my team members watch that, and I've had them with me observing some of those meetings, share that as well. So those are just a few of the tactics that I've been leveraging to start the movement towards this and understanding it and having it be common day to day. But I will say it takes some time, at least in my experience.
Super helpful. And then we had a question in chat. So is your documentation only for internal, or do you ever distribute this to your users?
Great question. So I was leaning specifically into my current experience, which we need an internal foundation before we can have an external foundation and share externally. That's at least my belief. I really think it's really important to have a great internal foundation before you invite others. We will have external documentation. So a good example of that I'm going to lean into user groups again. We are launching a user group leader program. Those user group leaders need to be enabled to be successful. And so we will have a whole documentation training, all the jazz involved with that. But yes, we will have external documentation stored and available, ideally within our community ecosystem that we'll be launching. Another good example of that, I would say, would be moderation and escalation. So I build very big moderation and escalation playbooks. Typically, they're very large cross-functional involvement in that. And I also build for my community to be enabled to be good community moderators, as well as understanding what your community expectations, guidelines, et cetera. So I think it comes in different forms, but yes, there's definitely an external piece of it too.
Awesome. Kayla, did you have any follow-up question other to that? Otherwise, I can move on to the next question. Okay, awesome. Of course. And then another question for you, Allison. Do you have anyone that's specifically community operations on your team, or are the community roles a hybrid of back-end ops and front-end member engagement? So I guess maybe like talk about your team structure.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So no, we don't have a dedicated community ops person yet. That is one of my big goals, is being able to build the validation for us to have an operation arms of our community. Right now, I have myself as the senior manager. I have a user group manager, and I have a community analyst, which is essentially an entry-level community position that is working with me on forum development pieces. So as you can imagine, based upon that, I probably own about 80 to 90% of the actual community building piece right now. And I, through some of this documentation and work that I'm doing on a foundational level, one of my big initiatives is, what do I need to be successful long-term, and what does our team look like?
Awesome.
Yes.
Maria, that sounds like that's you. You're acing it. This is wonderful to see.
Yes, and more than willing to answer any other follow-up questions as well. I know these are shared. Please feel free to connect via LinkedIn too. I know I'm still learning. I've been years into this, but I feel like that's the joy of community building, is it's a constant learning motion. So I always welcome feedback and appreciate your time. This is a big professional development push for me to do more of these engagements. Not my strong suit, so I'm working on it. So I appreciate the time.
You are a welcome speaker anytime, Allison. And Allison's actually, this is her second time speaking for Observations. So we're so happy to have you back. All right, Danny, kicking it off to you.
Okay, unmuted. Great job, Allison. As you said, I think that was a great tee up talking about macro level documentation strategy. And my point of view, as she mentioned, is going to give you kind of a step down, some specific templates and tactics that I find valuable. But first of all, let me introduce myself. Hello, everyone. This is my second time as part of this community. It was one of the best community events for community people that I've attended last time I was around. So I've been paying attention to it and thought this was a relevant topic. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. A little background on me. My contact information is there first. Reach out to either email. My work email is better for getting response from me. Slack DM me on CMX. That's where I heard about this and have been communicating with Tiffany and Cassie a little bit. And I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter, but I'm not super active there. My point of view that I'm going to share with you today is kind of shaped by my career. So currently, I'm the director of community at Uncork. Context for you there, I'm a team of one, but very well integrated within the broader customer success organization. I have a lot of great support from the adjacent teams and other parts of the business. A little bit about Uncork. We're an enterprise no-code platform helping leading organizations build, deploy, and manage complex software. We're about 4.5 years old. I joined 9 months ago. The company's based in New York City, but as you can see there, I recently relocated to Atlanta. So, we're a remote first company. We're leading in enterprise tech with this idea of codeless architecture. So I encourage you to Google us and learn about that. Really excited about what we're building. But most of my experience and point of view I'm sharing today comes from where I spent the first 10 plus years of my career. And that was at a company called ASUG. I worked with my good friend and former colleague, Kayla there, who's attending to cheer me on. Thanks for being here, Kayla. ASUG stands for America's SAP Users Group. SAP is an enterprise software company, if you're not familiar. And then in 2020, we entered into a joint venture with Google Cloud, creating essentially the equivalent of ASUG for Google Cloud, an independent customer community that we called C2C. I came up through the community department, ran chapter and kind of user group, interest group programs, volunteer programs, and I spent a couple of years leading large scale event planning as well. But the unique thing about those, and why I talk about that experience, is the unique thing about those companies and those communities is community was the product. So that's going to shape what I share with you here today. Other things about me on the pictures in the slide, I have a 6-month-old daughter. Her name's May. I absolutely love being a dad. I'm obsessed with my dog, Hayward. I am a diehard Cubs fan and was a season ticket holder for 6 years when I lived in Chicago. My educational background is actually in theater, and I specialize in a unique technique called unrehearsed Shakespeare. My current ops focus is about scaling moderation as we launch new forums and move towards a more open community as a team of one and working with internal teams, but also our community members. But let's get into my point of view and what we're here to talk about today. So the takeaway from what I'll share with you today are think and work like a product manager, visualize your process, and write a TLDR of the main takeaways like I'm sharing with you right now. So the first one, that product manager approach, is I took a product management strategy once my former employer realized, hey, communities are a product. We should look at it like a product. And with a background in theater, I took a course through Northwestern's Kellogg Business School of management on product strategy and product management. So I'm distilling down for you in the next couple minutes some key takeaways from me from there. For the other two, those are things that I learned in my decade working for a user group, which was very volunteer based and working with colleagues, volunteers, speakers, community members, etc. And people, you know, you got to love us. We're really great, but sometimes reading emails and reading documentation is not our strong suit. So hopefully I have some things that can help you out there. So let's get into it. So we're starting with talking about think and work and document like a product manager. And that comes from my point of view that every community is a product. It was unique to my previous employer, but I'm approaching things the same way at Uncork, and I recommend that you do too. Sure, there is a ton more to community than looking at it like a product. There's relationships, there's a sense of belonging. There's all the things that make community community, and that's the best part of working in community. But if your community has an online forum of some kind, or hosts events, or offers content, or has programs, your community is a product. And so the key to addressing adoption or engagement challenges is acknowledging that and accepting that fact. And looking at it that your community is a product, which is a collection of smaller products. It's a bundle of programs, events, access to people, resources, etc. So your community is a product. Think, work, and document like a product manager. So once you've kind of accepted or acknowledged this, you not only open yourself up to community ops and community resources, like all of the places that we're plugged into, but you also have this treasure trove of kind of industry thought leadership and content and frameworks for product management that you can leverage. So you've been staring at this title long enough, so let's click into the first kind of takeaway here. And this is a framework called the Jobs to Be Done framework. And what it boils down to is this theory in product management that the best products make our lives easier. They do a job for us better than the alternatives. When I'm doing something, I want or need something so that I can achieve the desired result. And there's an example here that is focused on product feedback or ideation forums that I'll be using throughout this. And so this probably seems simple and straightforward, right? But it's only simple if you do the work. Take a step back, remove assumptions, put yourself in the shoes of your end user, your community member, and think about what do they really want and why. Distill it down to its essence. You know, basic kind of customer experience strategy and approach there applied to your community products or the features within it. And so for me, the key part is actually just two of these boxes. The situation's nice, but the motivation, what they want, and the expected outcome, why they want it, is the key part. And so how I apply this is I use this framework for every single feature within my community. Because I look at it from, if I don't understand that feature, that program, that event, that gamification tactic, that forum, then I don't actually understand how what we're doing is making our community members' jobs easier or their lives better. And that's a red flag. Because if you can't distill things down to a true, honest answer, it's likely, from my experience, you're going to face adoption and engagement challenges. So with that, take a moment to think back. How many times has there been this amazing idea from your team, an idea from the business that's just so great, the best webinar, the best event, the best program, the best new feature on your community, and then that fell flat? I think if you're honest, or if you did a post-mortem analysis of that, it was probably because nobody was really asking for it in the first place, or it wasn't better than alternative ways to accomplish that result. I'm super guilty of this myself, and it's my biggest fear of some of the new forums that I'm launching right now. And so this framework helps really look at that and distill things down to its essence. I already talked through this, but there's my tip. Apply this to every feature in your community at a micro level and roll it up to the macro level as well. Is the collection of all of those parts, is that a compelling product that's solving a problem for your end user there? So the mature version of this is the product canvas. Excuse me. And so the Jobs to Be Done framework on the product canvas lives in that left box on the top row there. One second. So I'll let you read through the descriptions there and kind of highlight some things. But once you know what the job you're doing, the problem that you're solving, the center box is what's your solution for that? And then also, what are the alternatives? What's your competition? Is your solution better than the alternatives or the competition? And that's how all of these, as I pop in the examples here for you to kind of look at and think through, all of these are related. Your problem, or the customer problem, plus your solution writes your external facing value proposition for you. It's important to look at the competition, as I mentioned. And when you're looking at the competition, that gets to the business value of that feature or program or event, your competitive advantage. What's your business case? That's your business case for aligning internal teams. If we do this, then we get all of these things here, right? And that's how we win, or that's how we can beat our competitors or things like that. It doesn't always have to be about beating your competitors, but you should look at being competitive with the alternatives to make sure that it's relevant. And the competitive advantage is, like I said, your business case. And I've talked a lot about 5 of these boxes. The engagement channels is important too. If you got all this stuff figured out, you got a great solution to a problem. How are you going to tell people about it? How are you going to get them to know about it, adopt it? And how are you going to keep them engaged going on? What tools and tactics do you have within there? All right, I'm going to catch up to my notes here. So I think I've covered everything on that. So clicking into my favorite slide, in a quick digression. So at this point, you might be thinking to yourself, Danny, you're talking a lot more strategy than ops. So can you bring it back to documentation? And so my point of view here is strategy is worthless without documenting it. You might have heard the idiom, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, the best strategy isn't going anywhere if you can't align people to it. So I find that the product canvas is really helpful documentation tool and template for getting everybody on the same page, literally. One page, one table, the core elements of your strategy. And it takes a lot of work. I'm not super concise, so to distill things down into that one small table on one page takes a lot of work and really is going to improve your strategy and your process there. And simplifying it down helps people understand it. So do this for your community at a macro level, do it for every feature within it, every program or part of your online community. Sure, there's going to be repetition, but it's important to do this to understand the why and the how behind everything. From my experience also, the reason to do this is a good marketing team is going to make you do your homework. And filling out that product canvas is all of the questions that your marketing team is going to ask you. What's the value of this? What's the value proposition? Why are we doing it? How do they sign up? How do they get engaged? How do they stay engaged? So do all of that stuff up front. So instead of just being like, hey, we got a new forum, let's send an email about it. You've done that homework. You've aligned the team, including your marketing colleagues that you need support from to help get the word out and acquire users. So that brings us to the most fun part of the presentation and the next part here. This is where we're going to start transitioning to talk about people. And the thing about people is a lot of us don't like to read, or we have too much to read, too many emails, or we're not good at reading comprehension or retention. Or you know what, we do like to read, we're great at reading and retention, but community is not actually our job. We're just on the product team or speaker or something like that. And it's just something we're doing part-time, being engaged in the community. And so community doesn't stick for us like it might for the community team and the people leading that event. So this picture was just a fun way to tell you that a picture is worth 1,000 words. There's a reason that's an idiom as well. So as you can tell, brevity is not my strong suit. So perhaps more photos would have been better for a shorter presentation here. But I mention all of this because I mentioned a couple years planning large scale events and a long time working with volunteers. So a short story, an example of how I learned this lesson of pictures worth 1,000 words. We were planning this annual conference, 20,000 attendees, more than 600 sessions, 900 speakers, and 100 volunteers helping review 2,000 submissions to choose those sessions. And over a couple of years, I ran into problems with missed deadlines, action items, and the team not being aligned. And the racing and the stuff that Allison talked through was really helpful for that, but they still didn't get it because oftentimes they didn't read it, or reading it didn't allow them to retain. So what I figured out by kind of taking a step back and looking at things is most of the problems were coming from the speakers or the volunteers not understanding how their part of the process impacted and affected other parts of the process. And so I discovered Microsoft Visio, or any tool that you can do a workflow on. Slides will allow you to do this, Google Slides or PowerPoint. And we started introducing visual workflows into our presentations, into our emails and things like that, to literally show people how things went from this part of the process to the next. And it didn't solve everything. I don't think there's a magic bullet to all of that. But what it resulted in was missed deadlines didn't happen as much. Action items were happening earlier and on time. And the satisfaction from our collaborators, our volunteers, and our speakers went way up, and we got great feedback. And we saw that early with fewer questions on our alignment calls and updates. And it wasn't that they weren't ever listening, but showing them with the visual workflow really helped them understand. And then in the feedback surveys after the fact, we got great positive feedback that they understood their role, they understood how things work, they understood the why. And, you know, really from start to finish, they understood what they had to do and when. So a couple examples of how you can do this to make this real, to apply it here is there's a simple workflow on the experience for maybe using a feature on your community. That's the example right there, is what is the customer experience. So in addition to the documentation, that product canvas, one of the hard parts from my experience is getting people to understand how it actually works. So showing them what that user experience is helpful there. Complex workflows are really great too, especially for complex processes. And I really recommend using things like swim lanes. So swim lanes are good for dividing between different owners of different parts of the process, and to show that it goes from this owner up to this owner and it follows, and these things are interconnected, or these things influence each other. And the great thing about doing a visual workflow is sunlight's the best disinfectant. If you can't draw a line to the next thing, there's probably a gap in your process. So this is really good for you too. Another use case that you can see in my example there is showing the difference between things that are automated by the tools that you're using versus the things that people use and how those are interconnected there. So finally, to wrap things up and bring this home for you, and then one last piece of advice, here is the documentation that I do. And I'm not perfect at documentation, and as a team of one, I'm still working to get caught up with this, but I do one slide for every feature on my community. That gives me a way, pre-built things for decks whenever I have to present to someone or onboard someone. So you can see an example of our platform ideas one there. And that one slide is the product canvas and the experience overview workflow. I force myself to keep it to one slide to refine and be concise down and boil things down. And then you're gonna need a lot more documentation for the details of this, the processes, the playbooks. Are really +1 Allison's recommendation of a playbook. We use Confluence at Uncork. So I have a Confluence page for everything. Overall, there's probably 1 to 1.5 or 2 pages of content in there. And then I give you the structure of my Confluence pages. It's putting that canvas and experience workflow in there, visualizing as much as I can, doing bullet points, tables like Eracy are really great to throw into that. Another thing I don't have time to talk about, but for those of you who work at Salesforce or worked at Salesforce, the V2 Mom template is something else I learned in that product management course, and really like. It's very good framework and helpful as well. But that's how I organize things, and leaving you with, at the top, the TLDR. So if you remember where I started, I gave you the TLDR at the beginning, and we've talked about people and how we're not always good at reading or retaining information. And so start with, what are the 2 to 3 or 4 things that you need the person to understand, and really make that pop and stick. It's your thesis statement, but instead of being buried in an opening paragraph to your essay, it's bullet pointed, and it's using the TLDR meme to, one, get their attention, and to really focus their attention that these are the things that are important. And then hopefully they can retain, and it also helps unpack the things that are good, or put into context the things that are going to unpack it afterwards. So maybe you tuned out while I was talking. Maybe you really like what I had to say, but you're going to forget all of this. But I hope that you're going to take away my TLDR from the beginning, which is think, work, and document like a product manager, visualize your workflows, and offer a TLDR to make things stick for your colleagues, your collaborators, and your audience. That's it for me. What questions do you have?
Looks like there was a question from Tiff, just to hear, I think for everyone, but I'm curious to hear yours as well. Just what documentation tools you use? Like Confluence, Notion, Quip. Danny, which one do you use?
Yeah, I can start with that. We use Confluence. A lot of stuff lives in Google Docs and slides and things like that too. We're looking to kind of lean into Confluence a little bit more as a place to use that. I recommend that. For visual workflows, Lucid Charts is something that I've used and do use. Microsoft Visio, if you're a Microsoft shop, I think it's $10 a month on top of 365, and it's well worth it for the tools. But you can also build a lot of stuff with just like free icon sets from Google Slides and what Slides or PowerPoint is going to set you up to do. So those are the key things that I'm using.
I was just going to jump in really quick. One thing I learned, because we have Confluence, but we also have Quip. So I've had to actually lean into Quip because not everyone has access to Confluence. It's product team specific. So that's just something I would flag when you're doing that tool set alignment. Really make sure that you're selecting the platform that is kind of company-wide accessible, because I know that there's limitations with a lot of platforms on who can even view a document too. So just a tip I'll share out there, because I love Confluence, but I've had to leverage Quip because of the limitations I've encountered from an org perspective.
No, such a great point, and I forget the privilege that we have of that being our product, that's all that we use. But yeah, I've heard so many of the licensing or permissions issues, and blows my mind that so many different companies use so many different, so it makes it hard to align. So that is a super great call out. But there was another question here, but Tiff, I saw you unmuted. Did you have a question for Dan?
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to ask this one from Kayla. How do you foster, Danny, accountability within your internal teams to read, retain, and utilize these resources? Going back to the fish and the dog picture, a fair amount of reinforcement is still needed. So I'm curious how you structure those internal rollouts.
Yeah, I don't know. That's challenges that Kayla and I faced working together. We migrated our community 6, 7, maybe close to 8 months ago. And I'm just now finding that a lot of people are coming around and kind of like internally understanding some things. And the Confluence documentation's been up there. I see the view counts on some of my Confluence documentation, and that's why it's sometimes hard for me to prioritize it for other people. Putting it there, having it ready so that at least when you get asked about it, you have something to link to. This is all, I look at it from, this is all good homework for me to do for myself. So have it ready to go so that when you get asked to it, and then you can kind of point and reinforce to it there. Something I'm interested in related to this though, and I know that community teams don't often have the budget or the influence to do things like this, but take a look at what your company does from like a sales enablement or onboarding, and what tools you might have within the organization, like a learning management system. We just got a new colleague who comes over from another SaaS company, a vendor that does something around sales enablement, and it allows you to like record an onboarding video and then give them a quiz. So like essentially, I think that tool is called SalesLoft, but essentially you can do your onboarding recording one time and then give that to people, and then have them go through a retention thing. And as part of that, they have to then like do a demo of what they learned. So it's about enabling sales teams, but something like that, or whether it's a learning management system or something like that, is a good way to kind of force people to kind of put what they learn into practice. Because, another idiom for us all to focus on is teaching somebody something is a good way to learn it yourself. So I think that's what that tool is aligned off. So if you can find a way to have somebody else have to explain this externally or to someone else, it might make it stick.
Danny, if you don't mind if I add to that, one thing that I found really helpful, one thing I've just, again, probably leaning into my teaching experience too, repetition is so important, and kind of forcing habit too. So for my internal partners, I'm always bringing up the documentation in our meetings, and I'm always working out of it. So it's almost forcing those teams to have to go to it and leverage it for us to both meet our objectives in the end too. So that's just a tactic I found really helpful to kind of build the habit to reference it and to look at it and to leverage it, both from an internal and external team perspective.
Yeah, I find that I'm too at my best when I'm heavy-handed about that repetition, right? The unapologetic that I'm just going to take the 30 seconds to copy the Confluence link or link out to the strategy deck when I'm talking about people, because, what I said from working in user groups, something I've said throughout my career is, on our best day, we're somebody's third priority behind their family and their job. And so much of community is working with collaborators, other parts of your business, your community members, et cetera. So what you can do to set them up for success through repetition and to make it easy for them, that eventually it's going to stick. And so being heavy-handed about some things might seem a little passive aggressive or things like that. But from my experience, most people appreciate you making it easy for them by saying, here's the Confluence link to the playbook or whatever.
Agree, and inviting them into that collaboration process too, because I think that's at the heart of the community building piece too, is always seeking their feedback and interaction, and that it becoming a helpful tool for the work they're doing too, like you mentioned.
Perfect. Well, thank y'all so much. I think there might have been one more question, but Maria, if you can just drop it in the chat, we can close out, do our closing slides, but hopefully one of our presenters can answer it in the chat. But thank you both, Allison and Danny, so much for going over documentation and sharing your brain with us and just your processes and just dedicating time to sharing with us. That we really appreciate it. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen again to close out and talk about our next topic for the next event. So our next event will be on operational budget. So if you have any tips and tricks, best practices about tracking your budget, vendor management, procurement, all of those fun things, hit us up. As you know, we are on Slack, CMX, and Community Club Workspaces, but also our email is opsforcommunity@gmail.com. But yeah, hit us up if you are interested in presenting on operational budget. And then I'm going to transition into final notes. We do have our online or our community page built on Luma. Like I said, if you want to find any recordings or slide decks from past events or this event, it will be uploaded there. And lastly, I have exciting news that I am hiring a community operation coordinator. This is a contract role for 12 months. So if you know anybody getting a start or interested in a community operations coordinator role, please share with them. Or if any of y'all are interested, please apply. But yeah, I'm super excited. This will be the second ops person on the Atlassian team as it pertains to community. So definitely super excited about that. But other than that, I want to say thank you for everybody for attending. We love seeing your faces and talking about community ops stuff. So we hope to see you at the next event. All right, y'all. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone. See you next month.
Bye.